All right, here we go.
Good afternoon. This is Donald Kounovsky. I was born December 15th, 1937 in Hillsborough, North Dakota. And today is February 18th, 2025. So I'm 87 years old. But anyway, one of the things I would like to talk about a little bit, because it did affect my life, was back when we had the cabins on Lake Eunice. I had bought a boat with an 80 horsepower engine on it, and it was kind of old, but it worked well. We skied behind it and everything. One morning, I decided to go out and warm it up so I could come back and take the kids skiing, things like that. As I was out on the lake, what happened was, because the bolts holding the motor on, we found out later was the reason, the motor fell off, and as it fell off, it fell to one side, which pushed the boat into immediate right-hand turn. The steering wheel, of course, on that boat was on the right-hand side. So what happened, I tried to hang on to the steering wheel, but as I did, I slid backwards. I hit the side of the boat on the left-hand side and actually ended up doing a backward flip out into the water. And I came up, and I'm not a good swimmer, and of course, like all the time, I never had a life jacket on. That was a thing that you just didn't have to do anymore. I have ever since. But anyway, I ended up in the water, and I came up, and of course, the motor had fallen underwater, so it had quit. So I worked my way, swam over to the back of the boat, and I finally figured out that the engine was actually hanging on the cables then a little bit underwater. So I was able to put myself up on that and get back into the boat, and I no more got back into the boat and I passed out. So they saw this from shore because I wasn't that far out, and then the neighbors and some other people came out and got me, and I guess, woke up at that time, but they brought me back to the dock, laid me down on the dock, and I knew my back was hurting pretty bad at that time. But they called the ambulance, and they came and took me into Detroit Lakes. And what had happened was, because I hit my back so hard, all of the blood rushed to the injured area, and that's why I blacked out. But anyway, in Detroit Lakes, they determined nothing had been broke. It had just all been smashed, the muscles and everything. And of course, I had a lot of back problem after that for a while. But I got back into Fargo, and I didn't go to work for a week. I just couldn't really get up and move around or anything. But it was just fortunate that engine was hanging on to the boat, or else I would have never had the strength to get back into the boat. So good Lord was smiling at me, so I'm pretty fortunate. So that's one of the things that happened that was kind of serious in my life.
You're going to talk a little bit about your business?
And then as time went on, of course, I worked at AAA, and while I was there, I think we talked about this, but I built the lake cabin, and then I had always wanted to be in a business of my own. So, well, I was in the bowling business on my own too, but anyway, I wanted to get into something again, and I wanted to be in something auto related. So Dick Pella was a gentleman that owned, he called it Twin City Salvage at the time, but he wanted to sell because it was a tough business for him to run from Minneapolis, and he'd had a lot of problems with managers, things like that. So I worked a deal with him to buy the business, and I bought the salvage pool business and 10 acres of land right next to the interstate, between the interstate and West Acres. And of course, that was fortunate because the end result was that was valuable land. But I started in January of 1979, and what I did as a business, I worked mainly for the insurance companies. It was called a salvage pool because we pooled a bunch of cars together to sell them. And these were damaged cars, so if the insurance company had totaled out the car you were driving and you had an accident and totaled it, they had to have some place to put that car to get rid of it. They could sell to anybody as far as what they could do with it, or they could sell to the parts like Geller's Auto Parts and Hazer's Auto Parts, things like that in Fargo. But it had been proven in Minneapolis that if the insurance companies bring the cars to the salvage pool, there's a lot more buyers and they have to bid on them, so they end up with more money. So the way my business worked was I had to be really good with all the claims adjusters and all the insurance companies, because I wanted them to bring their cars to me, which worked out well. And then every 3 weeks I would put out a list, and to start with, we charged $5 a year to get the list. We didn't want to just send it to every Tom, Dick, and Harry, so we did get a little return to get the list out, but we had to hand address all of those. But then as time went along, then we got a linotype, which we had a metal plate so we could address the envelopes. That took forever too. And then, holy mackerel, when they finally got where they could call me on, what do I call it? Not email, but
The fax?
a fax machine is what they could use. And they could call me on that and talk about what damage was and things along that line. Then we finally got a video camera, and we would video the complete car. We'd walk around it and talk about it and tell them what it was. And then I had gone and put a TV set and a VCR player in, like Grand Forks and Minot and Devil's Lake and Bismarck and over in South Dakota and over in Minnesota. So if you wanted to not drive all the way to Fargo to look at these cars, you could just drive to this closer area and look at them. And then, of course, everything was done on sealed bids. I didn't have a key for the box or anything like that. The insurance companies had that. So people would come in and put their bids in, or mail them to somebody and have them dropped in the box. Then every third Wednesday, the adjusters would come out, go down the basement of the office and separate them and initial them so that everybody knew what was happening. And then they would award the cars to whoever was the high bidder. And if they didn't feel they got enough money, then they could put them up for sale after that, or run them again on the next list. Well, then, to keep the insurance adjusters happy, then I would buy lunch for them over at Mr. Steak. And they loved that, because then I had a little deal where I would have them guess on some item as to what it's going to bring. And when we'd get over there, the guy that was the closest, well, I'd give him $50. So they felt this is a real good deal. They get a small steak and a $50 bill if they get the prize. And sometimes I'd have 20 to 25 adjusters that I'd have to buy lunch for. But I looked at it this way: if each adjuster brings me one cars, then they've paid for their lunch. So that was my way of promoting the business, and it worked out real well. And I kept the business then until actually 1995. And then I thought about selling it to the employees, because they had asked about it, and that didn't seem to go very far. And then one day, one of the adjusters by the name of Leroy Smith came in and asked if I'd sell the business to somebody else, because his brother Marvin Smith was a broker at a financial deal in Fargo, but he loved cars and he would like to buy a business that he could somehow be a little related in the car business. The end result was that I gave him all my records, and that went on, and started in January. And my wife says, "Oh, he just wants to know what kind of business you have," because I just turned everything over to him and said, "Look it out, look it over." And he went to the bank, everything else. Then in May, he came and he had an offer, and I decided that it was good enough, so I accepted the offer, and he took over the business. But what happened to Marvin Smith was it was June or July of that summer, he and his family had a pontoon out on the big Detroit lakes, and they had jet skis and they were chasing around, and somebody ran into his jet ski, put the handlebar right into his chest, broke a bunch of ribs. They got him back onto the pontoon, but by the time he got to the shoreline and things like that, why, he had died. So then Leroy Smith put his son in as running the salvage business, and finally, then after 18 months, which was part of the agreement, then they moved out and I started selling the property. And of course, that turned out to be a pretty good deal, because in the process, I'd bought more land alongside of it. So that started me out to have a little more money to go out and do a lot of things.
Do you want to talk a little bit about how many your old houses quickly, about what you did there?
Well, actually, the first old house I think I talked about once here in one of these deals was back in the late 60s. I bought a house on the corner of 5th Avenue and 10th Street South and remodeled that, realized there was money in it. And then I didn't do very many when I had the salvage pool, because I was quite busy too at that time. But as an end result, now as I've ended up, I have pictures of about 50 houses that I remodeled and sold. And at one time I had a bunch of them rented out too. But as it went on, why, then I bought them and fixed them and sold them. And of course that was fun for me. I just really enjoyed it. Very independent business. You could do your own work and do it your way, and then if they didn't want to buy the house, they didn't have to. But then as it went along, then starting in 2000, when we were going into the new millennium at Elam Lutheran Church.
Can I ask you one question before you get that?
Yes.
So you started remodeling houses in 1969, you think?
Yes, yes.
And when was the last one you did?
The last one I did was last fall. I sold the last house. I had a house in Dilworth that I bought and worked on, last summer, and worked on that one and got it on the market and sold it in December. And I don't know if I'm going to buy any more. I think at this stage of my life, I'll probably call it good, because if you figure all the houses that I did, and then we did this rehab project.
Well, so just in rough terms, you started in 1970 and you ended in 2025. If I do my math correctly, is that 55 years of doing remodeling houses?
Yes.
Well, that's a long time.
It's a long time.
And then you did a bunch, though. Now you're going to get into the next story of how you did a bunch just not for profit that you just worked on, right?
Right.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, anyway, in this whole process, then at the start of the millennium, I happened to be president of the church council at Elam. And of course, the big thing is, what are we going to do in the new millennium, so that the church is serving the world and things like that. And I had just bought a house. So I said, well, people need housing. So why don't we do this? We will have everybody, or whoever wants to work on it, we'll do the project of remodeling this house, and then we will sell it to they'll have a committee to choose somebody, and we'll sell it to them for what we paid for it, plus the material that went into it, nothing for labor. And of course, we got a lot of material donated in this whole process, but we did that first house in 2000. And it worked out really good, because when we got done, we only had $35,000 in the house, which was a lot more, or a lot less than what the house was valued at. So, and also one of the things they had to do was live in the house for 5 years. If they lived in it, then they could sell it and take the profit and do whatever they wanted, or continue to live in it. So that worked out well, and we did the this house was for Michael Kipe. We did that, and their family was having a problem with a place to live, so that worked out well. And then he kept that for 5 years, and he decided to sell it, and he did well financially selling that house, so they were able to go on in the world and enjoy life. And then after that, where there were actually 5 houses that were for sale on 3rd Avenue North. They were all alike, built in the 1930s. They were small 2-bedroom stucco houses, and the guy that owned them wanted to sell everything as one unit. There were 4 exactly alike and one that was a little bigger 2-story house. So I went to the church, to the meeting that they had at the church about it, had video of it, and told them that I think what we can do, we don't have enough people at Elam to do this project. So what we can do is we can go to different churches and ask if they want to do the labor for it and adopt that particular house. And they wouldn't have to buy any material. I would take care of getting all materials to them and everything along that line, and as far as what we wanted to do to the houses. So First Lutheran adopted one, and the Catholic Church over in Moorhead adopted one, and the Lutheran Church in South Moorhead adopted one. I'm so old I can't remember the names of the churches. And let's see who adopted the 4th one. Anyway, there were 4, well, I guess that was 3, and then Elam had the 1. That's the way it worked out. And we sold the 5th house without even doing anything to it. So that went on and worked out very well, and we got everybody in houses. And then there was a house that they called the Lemonade House in the end because it was yellow, but it was over by Horace Mann, and that had been kind of a dope house. And the end result was that the Horace Mann Association would like to have that thing remodeled and put on the market rather than to sit there in the way it was. So Elam says, we'll work on that for you, and we did that house. And then from that one, there was East on Kounovsky that lived, that had come from Haiti, was a member of Elam's congregation, and David Akers, who was the pastor, his wife, thought they should have a house. So we got one over by Concordia in Moorhead and worked on that one and got it all fixed up. Matter of fact, Easton still lives in that house after all these years. And then let's see, where did we go from there?
So how many houses in total did you do with Elam, do you think?
With Elam, we did 9 of them. And the last one worked out quite well because there was a gal on 4th Street down by Sanford Hospital that was ill, and she had been a student at Oak Grove years and years ago. Her husband had died. So she had this house, and it was in need of repair. So she called Oak Grove and talked to Bonnie Almond, because Bonnie would bring kids from Oak Grove over a couple of times a week for a couple of hours, and they would work on these houses for Elam or whoever we were working them for. Well, anyway, this lady said that if Elam would agree to remodel the house and then let Oak Grove sell it and get all of the profit, she would give it to Oak Grove. So we went through all the legal stuff to get that drawn together, and that's the way it worked out. And when we were all done and sold it, I think it was around $75,000 that Oak Grove ended up with. And that was actually the last house then that we did, but that was the 9th one in this whole process.
All right. Can you talk a little bit about your roll-log experience?
Okay. Because it seemed like I had a little extra time, and I had worked on those volunteer houses for many hours. Why, back in 2009, I had thought I should get a log home someplace, a log cabin, and do something with it. And I found one close to Cormorant Lutheran, or right next door to Cormorant Lutheran Church, as far as that goes. And the end result of that was they put that cabin on the Cormorant Church auction, and I bought it. And then I went to the Steam Threshers reunion because we had all the history on that cabin. That was one of the nice things about it. After I bought it, this guy by the name of Gary Globstead came up to me and he says, "Well, I lived in that cabin back in the 1950s as a child." So that started the fact that his great grandfather had built the cabin. So we had all this history, and then we talked about, well, if I moved it to a lake lot and made a lake cabin out of it, the way lake lots are going, somebody would tear that down and build a big house. So I went to the Steam Threshers meeting and said, would you guys be interested in this from Cormorant Township? Because we have all the history and everything. And they said, well, we sure would, but we don't have any resources. So I just simply said to them, here's what we'll do. If you want it over at Prolog for Steam Threshers, just consider it, color it done. I will move it and pay all the costs and remodel it, and then it'll belong, of course, to Steam Threshers. And I'll also go every year and be there during the 4 days to visit with people about the house and the history and everything else. So that was an interesting project, and I still enjoy it because every summer I have to go down and do work on it because it, some of the chinking falls out, things like that. So that was a really, really fun project, and I'm just happy now. It's like any history. That history will be there as long as Steam Threshers are around, and they have 6,000 members and all these old buildings and tractors and stuff that they take care of. So I think Steam Threshers will be there basically forever.
And you think that was, and maybe you said this and I just missed it, you thought it was the oldest house in the township, or?
Yes, Gary Globstead, who lived there, comes over during Steam Threshers and sits around and talks to people. And we have him on a recording that he made that it was his great grandfather that, or they built 3 cabins, or they're actually log homes because of the size of them. They're 2-story, but they built 3 of them in 1871, the year after these people came and staked their claim for their 160 acres. And the thing about the cabin is that then as that got built, why they wanted to get the church built, and of course nobody was donating land, so they decided that they would, and it was actually Sievert Olson got Globstead through marriage, but anyway, he decided that he would give them an acre and a half of land right close to the cabin within a half a block. So you see, Sievert Olson was the smartest Scandinavian that ever came to Minnesota in that area because nobody else wanted to donate land for a church. So come cold days, Christmas Eve, they would have to harness up, probably drive 3 to 4 miles, unharness their horses, tie them in the barn, and then get their coats off and go to church. Sievert Olson put his coat on, walked a block, and he was in church. So he was the smartest guy. He never had to harness a horse to go to church. So he was the smartest Scandinavian that ever came.
So I'm going to ask you a question, and I didn't tell you I was going to ask you this question, but looking back over your 87 years, and you're talking to somebody in the future, got any advice you'd give to people?
Any advice?
Advice, yeah.
Well, have a warm bed and a full stomach, and you don't need much else. That's basically my advice. But I still am one of those people that believe if you're in any kind of work, if you're willing to work hard, I think that it'll work out for you because it's so simple. The good Lord takes care of everything. My wife happens to be right now in a care facility with Alzheimer's, and the good Lord is taking good care of her. I get to go and see her every day, hold her hand, help her eat, all this sort of good stuff. That's been going on now for over 3 years. and life is so easy if you just don't get too excited about it. Don't try and correct everybody else, and work on things that you know how to do. And I think you'll get through life without any of the worries that the people. I'm not even on Facebook.
All right. Anything else you want to say today?
Oh, that should be enough for right now.
All right. Well, that sounds great. Thanks so much.
Okay.